So a highly anticipated fixture is just around the corner. Ireland versus New Zealand in the Rugby World Cup quarterfinals. Now this game, it has been heavily talked about. A lot of people undecided in terms of who will walk away with the victory. But in this preview, we will be looking through at the lineup selected, the key players for the two sides, their previous Rugby World Cup fixtures, and then also a prediction at the end of who we think will be walking away with the victory. But we will start with the Irish starting lineup. They did announce their side the earliest out of any team in these Rugby World Cup quarterfinals. In the front row, Andrew Porter, Dan Sheehan, and Tadhg Furlong. At number 3, a very strong front 3 to start with. Dan Sheehan, one of the players for Ireland, who did have a few injury troubles earlier on in the competition. He's back to 100% now. Certainly will be a danger to the ABs. In the lock and duo, Tadhg Beirne and Ian Henderson. Then in the loose forward trio, Peter O'Mahony at number 6. Number 7, it is Josh Van den Flaer. And number 8, Caelan Doris. Overall 4-pack for Ireland, looking extremely strong. Now they do have one of the fastest rucks, if not the fastest, in world rugby. The reason for that is the way the forwards are able to get over the ball, protect it so that Jamison Gibson-Park or Conor Murray, depending on who it is, can get that ball as quickly as possible, start feeding it to the backs. And looking through at this back line, I've already mentioned who is at number 9, Jamison Gibson-Park, as the starting halfback. In this quarterfinal, number 10, Johnny Sexton, who will also be captain. He is one of the biggest keys for the Irish that they can have in this Rugby World Cup competition. It will be his last World Cup. He has shown his class all throughout the competition and will be crucial for this game. Up against New Zealand, out on the left wing, it is James Lowe, luckily, is back from his injury that he did sustain in the game. Up against Scotland in the midfield combo, it will be Bundy Aki at number 12 and Gary Ringrose at number 13. Definitely putting in an argument for the best midfield combo in world rugby today. Number 14, Mac Hansen, also had a few injury troubles, but has been cleared to be able to play. And then number 15, Hugo Keenan, man who's had a huge amount of pressure on him throughout this Rugby World Cup, up against some of those top sides in Pool B, that has been able to handle that pressure and will look forward to the next challenge of the quarterfinals. But the key players for the Irish, I know Dan Sheehan will be heavily looked at throughout this fixture due to that line-out throw, needing it to be 100% accurate. And with Retallick and Barrett, they'll both be searching for those line-out steals. But if Sheehan can get it right, which is something that Ronan Kelleher was not quite able to do up against the South Africans, the Irish and their rolling maul should find that little bit of success. In the loose forward trio, you could easily go with all 3 of the individuals, but I think Josh Van den Flaer is the player who I'm looking at just that little bit closer than the other two. The reason for that is the amount of work that he does off the ball, as well as just being able to get that important, crucial turnover in the most opportune times for the Irish to be able to get that counter-attack going. And when you've got a back line like this, that is exactly what they will be wanting to do. And then in that back line, I've mentioned him already, he's the biggest key on the field for the men in green, that being Johnny Sexton. If he plays well, Ireland play well. Now they have got Jack Crowley off the bench, but the other big thing for Johnny Sexton is he does need to avoid injury here. He's done it so well throughout this Rugby World Cup competition, and I'd like to think he'd be able to do it throughout the rest of the World Cup for Ireland, whether that is this game as their final one or whether they do go all the way in the competition. Johnny Sexton, he's the key in the World Cup, sitting on his shoulders. Looking through at the All Blacks starting lineup, at number 1, Ethan de Groot returns from his suspension. Number 2, Cody Taylor. And number 3, Tyrell Lomax, who has been working off a bit of an injury, so hopefully will be 100%, but there is a chance that that sub needs to be made just that little bit earlier. In the lock and duo, Brodie Retallick at number 4 and Scott Barrett as the number 5. Then loose forward trio, Shannon Frizzell at 6. Sam Cane, number 7, will also be captain. He was tested in the game up against Uruguay to see whether or not he did have the potential of going 80 minutes. He did pass that test, making 100% of his tackles along the way. And then number 8, a man who was rested in the game up against Uruguay, but he will be back now, that being Ardie Savia. In the back line, Aaron Smith and Richie Mo'unga will be the 19 combo. Out on the left wing, it is Leicester Fainanuku. Now in my original lineup video, I said the reason it was Fainanuku over Mark Talia may have been an injury concern, but turns out it was something completely different. Mark Talia out for disciplinary issues, so not ideal in a quarterfinal of a Rugby World Cup. In the midfield combo, Geordie Barrett and Rico Ioane, a very strong one for the ABs, and ever since Geordie Barrett's returned at 12, has seemed like the backline has been functioning that little bit better. Out on the right wing, it is Will Jordan, and then a number 15 to close out the side for the All Blacks, it will be Beauden Barrett. So both sides looking strong in their starting lineups. If we had to pick 3 key players for the All Blacks in this game, it would be very easy to base it off what we said for the Irish, going with, of course, the number 2, the number 7, and the number 10. But for the All Blacks, I'm looking at Ardie Savea. First of all, in that 4-pack, he seems to be able to step up in the big matches. He'll want to put on a show here, but it was the first time he wasn't in the lineup for 2023. In fact, the first time he wasn't in the starting lineup last week up against Uruguay. So he will feel like he's got a little bit of something extra to prove here, Ardie Savea, and that is when can be extremely dangerous in that back line. I think Lester Fainanuku could be a massive injection into this AB side, mainly because of what he's able to do when he has the ball in hand, but also when he sees the opportunity for a pick and go around the side of the breakdown. The thing is, him and Talia both do it, but the thing that seems to separate them is Fainanuku is able to stay on his feet just that little bit longer to allow the AB's forwards to get into that breakdown, allowing them to keep possession. So Fainanuku definitely looking for some meters throughout this contest. And then the next key player for the All Blacks, I'm going to go big Brodie Retallick. He's a workhorse at number 4. He'll be wanting to play the full 80 minutes here if he can. If he can get a couple line-out steals, retain the line-outs for the Kiwis, could be a very exciting game for big Brodie Retallick. But now looking through at the previous fixtures for these two sides, we will start with the Irish. It is a very impressive World Cup thus far for the Irish, still sitting with their winning streak intact and sitting with 4 wins from 4 throughout Pool B. Their first game was up against Romania. They were able to win it 82 points to 8. So a great way to start their Rugby World Cup. 4 Irish players getting 2 tries in that fixture, and all 4 of those players in the starting lineup up against the All Blacks here. In their second game, it was up against Tonga, and they were able to win it 59 points to 16. So once again, a comfortable win for the Irish. The trend throughout this Rugby World Cup is that they haven't really been conceding a huge amount of tries, but their discipline throughout their games has been very impressive for the Irish. Up till date, in their next game, it was up against the Springboks. They did win it 13 points to 8. It was a massive clash. Both sides putting in a valiant effort in the way that they played, but the Irish, they were able to be that little bit more clinical and managed to get themselves that win by the 5 points. The thing is, if results go a certain way in these quarterfinals and the semis, that could be the final of the Rugby World Cup. So it would be extremely intriguing to see how their rematch went. And then their last game that they played, it was up against Scotland, 36 points to 14. They had less possession in that game than Scotland, but were still able to take the most of their opportunities, get themselves the tries. They did concede 2 back-to-back. That was when the Scottish were going heavy attack. But interestingly enough, with some of the selections the All Blacks have gone with off their bench, I don't think we're going to see that same impact. But speaking of the All Blacks, in their first game up against the French, they did lose it 27 points to 13. Now that was their only loss in the Rugby World Cup, but it was the opener, of course not the start to the competition the All Blacks were after. In their next game, they won it 71 points to 3 over the Namibians. Their game up against Italy was certainly an unpredictable one, 96 points to 17. Over 100 points scored in that game. The All Blacks looked clinical. They did have some very good moments. I believe that from the performance of some players in that contest is why we are seeing certain players get the chance here. And then their last game, it was up against Uruguay, and they did win it 73 points to 0 to close out Pool A of the Rugby World Cup. So those are the fixtures. Those are the teams. Now we are up to that stage of giving a prediction of what we think the score will be. Now this one is an extremely tricky one, because if I back the All Blacks, I'm seen as biased. If I back the Irish, I'm seen as a traitor. So there's no real way of winning in this scenario for the prediction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look back to what I predicted at the start of this Rugby World Cup. That is before we saw any of the fixtures take place. Only seeing the squads at that point, I did come up with certain scores. Now I did actually predict these two sides would play each other in the Rugby World Cup quarterfinals, but I do have to say my prediction might be a little bit too high, because it is the All Blacks 32, the Irish 26. Now I feel like one of these two sides to win by 6 points, very high possibility, but for them to both score over 25 points in this quarterfinal. I feel like I need to at least knock 10 points off each side, so maybe a 22-16 scoreline could be a little bit more likely. But either way, it's going to be an awesome game, and it should be one that goes down to the wire. I am just curious to see what kind of impact the benched players can have throughout this fixture. For the Irish, they have got some great players in there. Jack Conan, Joe McCarthy, I felt that he did very well in the limited opportunities he has had throughout this Rugby World Cup competition. Connor Murray, Finlay Bealham, there's definitely potential for the Irish later on in this game. Then for the All Blacks, I think the big question mark that a lot of people were looking at was Finlay Christie's selection in this All Blacks quarterfinal side. Now, Ian Foster described it as the reason they selected Christie is because he is better on defence than Cam Roigard. Now, that's all well and good, but then you look at what Cam Roigard and Damian McKenzie have been able to do when they both come off the bench late in a contest. At the end of the day, the All Blacks, they're known as an attacking side. They don't want to spend the last 20 or 30 minutes defending, because up against a side like Ireland, they're eventually going to be able to break that defensive line and score themselves a try. So I feel like I still would have liked to see the inclusion of Cam Roigard coming off the bench for the ABs, and perhaps that could be a massive difference maker in the later stages of the contest. But I do thank you all very much for tuning in. If you did enjoy this preview, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. We will be live on the channel doing our watch along throughout the quarterfinal fixture, so be sure to check that out. And also let me know what you think the score will be in the comments down below. But thank you all very much for tuning in, and I will see you all for the next one.